Support for I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere is made possible by the Wessex Press, the premier publisher of books about Sherlock Holmes and his world. Find them online at wessexpress.com. And the Baker Street Journal, the leading publication of Sherlockian scholarship since 1946. Subscriptions available at bakerstreetjournal.com.
I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, Episode 68, Sherlock Holmes on Radio, Part 1.
I hear of Sherlock everywhere since you became a chronicler.
In a world where it's always 1895, comes I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, a podcast for devotees of Mr. Sherlock Holmes, the world's first unofficial consulting detective.
I've heard of you before. You're Holmes the meddler, Holmes the busybody, Holmes the Scotland Yard Jack in office.
The game's afoot as we discuss goings-on in the world of Sherlock Holmes enthusiasts, the Baker Street irregulars, and popular culture related to the great detective.
As we go to press, sensational developments have been reported.
So join your hosts, Scott Monty and Bert Wolder, as they talk about what's new in the world of Sherlock Holmes.
You couldn't have come at a better time!
Ha, ha, ha! What a great time it is!
Yes.
I am Scott Monty.
Yes, you are. And I'm, unfortunately, Bert Wolder.
No, that's fortunate for all of us,
Oh.
especially everyone who's listening. And thank you once again for joining us here at I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, the first podcast for Sherlock Holmes devotees where it's always 1895.
Yes, and we show a remarkable stick-to-itiveness. You know, this is now our 68th episode, and we are still the first podcast for Sherlock Holmes enthusiasts. How long
you think
will that
will
continue?
Ever change?
I
Will
don't-
that change?
I don't know. Every week, every month, I look to see if it's changed, but not yet.
Well, hey, the good news is the podcasting field is, well, I won't say getting crowded, but it is having other comers. Of course, the Baker Street Babes have been at it for quite some time now as well. And they've got a lovely little podcast there among their feminine voices. Also, the Three Patch podcast, born out of the Sherlock BBC fandom. So great to hear folks like that also joining the fray.
Yeah, I will have to listen to that. I've not heard that.
Yeah, a little something for everyone. And you were recently a guest on another podcast.
Oh, I was. Boy, that was a lot of fun.
Tell us about it.
Well, that's the Country Squire podcast. It's Country Squire Radio, and we should give you the link in the show notes. But this is a terrific podcast. I really enjoyed it. Very professionally produced. It's been going on for some time. It's from Mississippi, from Jackson, Mississippi. And in Jackson, Mississippi, there is a pipe shop, a pipe and tobacco shop called the Country Squire. And they have adopted podcasting, among other things. They also have a great website to talk about, of all retro behaviors, pipe smoking and its attendant culture, different kinds of tobacco, pipe smoking practices, and indeed great pipe smokers of fact and fiction. And so Scott and I were invited to join them to talk about Sherlock Holmes, perhaps the greatest of all pipe smokers. And I was really tickled to spend about 40 minutes with them going over pipe smoking in the canon and pipe smoking in general. It was really a lovely, lovely conversation, and they were very patient with some technical difficulties that I had connecting to them. But it's great. They do the podcast via a Google Hangout. I don't know if that's their continuing practice, but it certainly was when I joined them. And so so they do it really like a live radio show, and you have an opportunity to join them through the Hangout and look at their production process and hear the thing happening live, which is a lot of fun. And they cleaned up all of the technical issues in their editing. But it was a great conversation. We went into Holmes pipes, different actors, tobaccos in the canon, and it was a great conversation.
Yeah, I enjoyed listening to it, and I would imagine that our listeners will as well. So we will have a link there to the episode that you were actually on.
Yeah, very good. Very good. We have to encourage all of this podcast. It's amazing, what corners of human practice and enthusiasm podcasting, just conversations by enthusiasts, can illuminate. It's really, it's great. Absolutely great.
So we have a monumental show lined up today, but before we get to that stuff, there's a few things that we need to take care of. One is to remind you that there are a number of ways of getting in touch with us, and we do thank those of you who have. A lot of the interaction has been coming on the social networks lately, such as Facebook and Twitter and Tumblr, all of which you can find us on as I Hear of Sherlock.
Yes, and also the group that is now 1895. Do you want to make a little mention of that?
Yeah, how about that? Our Sherlock Holmes community on Google+. Just before we sat down to record, we noted that the membership there, which has been consistently growing, had reached the magical number of 1895. There are over 1,895 members of the Sherlock Holmes community on Google+. You can find that at just go on to Google+, search for Sherlock Holmes Community, or bit.ly, that's bit.ly/SH Community, capital S, capital H, capital C. You will find lots of stuff going on there, whether it's related to Jeremy Brett, Benedict Cumberbatch, the original stories, news, comic books, images, links, everything. It's all there, and it's all fan-driven, too. We sit back and moderate here and there, but it's really fan-driven, and it's lovely to see it taking off at this rate.
Yeah, I must say the Sherlock Holmes Gum forum is pretty light, though.
That's sticky.
Yeah, it is. It's very, very sticky. What was that? What was the magazine that Calvin used to subscribe to from Calvin and Hobbes? Was it called Chew? Was that it?
I don't remember.
He would get updated. We'd get the latest issue of Chew, the magazine for chewing gum enthusiasts.
What a great little comic, though. Did they ever do anything Sherlockian that you recall?
No, I don't think so. Not that I remember. But that's. Oh, I'm sure I would remember if Hobbes ever put on a Deerstalker. I'd remember that.
I did see a few months ago a version of Calvin and Hobbes that a fan did with Freeman and Cumberbatch in their respective roles. It was actually really well done. I'll see if I can find that and stick it in the show notes, because I thought it was just...
Oh, I'd like to see that.
A really nice rendition.
Huh.
Yeah. But, of course, you can also reach us at comment at ihearofsherlock.com. You can go to our website, ihearofsherlock.com.
Yep, you can call us. Call us, please, now. Well, not right now, but soon, at 774-221-READ. That's 774-221-7323. And leave us your thoughts, ideas, comments, suggestions, complaints, wishes, dreams.
Confessions.
We'll take
innermost
all
secrets, yes.
We're very good.
Bank account numbers.
Very discreet. And leave a review for us if you are listening, if you're still listening. Those one or two of you that are still listening, please leave us a review on iTunes, which will really help us, because the more reviews that we get, the better the podcast does.
Absolument, mon ami. So today, this is, to me, I think, one of the most exciting episodes that we've done yet, because part of the origins of I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere came out of my own personal interest in the audio world of Sherlock Holmes in general, and just the theater of the mind, as radio has often been called. And we've had discussions that go back many years with Bert Coules, who is the head writer for the BBC Sherlock Holmes series with Clive Merrison and Sherlock Holmes. And before Bert gets here, I would just like to set this up with a supporting audio clip so that our listeners really understand exactly what it is that we're about to get into. And Bert put together, as part of the preparations for the original recording of The Hound of the Baskervilles in 1988, some character notes. And these character notes, I think, have done a remarkable job of summing up the collective qualities of both Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson. And Bert Wolder and I are going to read each respective one here. I'll take the first one for Sherlock Holmes. Sherlock Holmes was described to John Watson before they met as too scientific for my tastes. It amounts to cold-bloodedness. I can imagine as giving a friend a pinch of poison, simply, though I think he would take it himself in the same readiness. And then Watson himself later called Holmes the most perfect reasoning machine the world has ever seen. All emotions are abhorrent to his cold, precise, admirably balanced mind. But eventually he came to realize that this was too simplistic a description. And of course, later stories carry mentions of a great brain, a great heart as well as a great brain, and stress the dual nature of the detective's personality, the languid, philosophizing dreamer who can be replaced in seconds by a hyperactive, relentless sleuth. Watson also came to view Holmes as an isolated, lonely, even tortured man, unable to express the depth of his true feelings and taking refuge behind the mask of superiority and seemingly inexplicable powers. There's an ever-present dark side to Holmes, liable to surface at any moment. He has a dangerous, knife-edge unpredictability. And then the detective's other major traits are his delight in all that is bizarre, his intense opposition to evil and injustice, his occasional proud, almost aristocratic manner, his wildly extrovert outbursts of laughter and song, his distrust of the female sex, his extreme untidiness, and, of course, his deep and dependent friendship with John Watson.
John H. Watson, who is far from being the bumbling comic relief buffoon of some representations. Watson is an ex-army doctor who has seen action overseas, and a man of the world who can boast of an experience of women which extends over many nations and 3 separate continents. The detective is fond of labeling the doctor the eternal man of action. In later life, Watson becomes famous as an accomplished best-selling author, in no small part responsible for the public success and reputation of his friend. Watson is, in the best possible sense, the Victorian gentleman, intelligent, trustworthy, down-to-earth, honest. His developing friendship with Holmes is based on a shared love of all that is outside the humdrum routine of everyday life, great admiration for the detective's powers of logic and deduction, and perhaps most of all, the knowledge that Holmes' extremes would destroy him without a Watson to keep him sane. It is Watson who eventually cures Holmes of his addiction to cocaine. After many years of friendship, Holmes to the doctor, "Good old Watson, the one fixed point in a changing age." And Watson of Holmes, "the best and wisest man whom I have ever known." At the time of The Hound of the Baskervilles, both men are in their late 30s. And it's worth taking a look back at one of the greatest and most iconic moments in the canon, when they were even younger.
Stamford! I found it! Ha-ha! Stamford! I found it! I knew I would.
Dr. Watson?
Mr. Sherlock Holmes.
How do you do?
How are you? You've been in Afghanistan, I perceive.
How on earth did you know that?
Never mind. Come and look at this.
Wow. The introductions don't get much better than that. And with that, I think we turn to our guest and we say, you've been in Indianapolis, we perceive.
How on earth did you know that?
Never mind. Bert Coules, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much indeed. It's a pleasure to be here.
Now, this is a long-threatening conversation we've had. Bert, we must get you on the show. We must get you on the show. And we
Yes,
finally
indeed.
found an excuse. What is that excuse?
You couldn't by any chance be referring to the release by Gasogen Press of the new edition of my book 221 BBC.
That is exactly correct, sir. What does he win, Bert?
And you win a signed copy of 221 BBC, signed by yourself.
Can I just apologise to Gasogen Books for getting their name wrong?
Well, with Gasogen Books, it's just the gas that's most important.
That's true. And this is interesting because this is kind of an intersection with our sponsors, the West Express, which in conjunction with Gasogen Books produce and publish all of these fine books. But 221 BBC has long been an interest of mine in particular because I have a copy in my hand of Musgrave Monograph number 9. It's a thin volume, about 76 pages, copyright 1998, and it was titled 221 BBC. And there on the cover is Clive Merrison in his classic pose, recreating the Sidney Paget drawing of Sherlock Holmes.
And the resemblance is quite amazing.
It is, isn't it? That wasn't part of the casting, was it?
No, not at all. But it's surprising how often an actor who's cast for his voice does actually look right as well. But it's rare to find one who looks as right as Clive Merrison does.
Interesting. I like that. So, and of course, 221 BBC, the new revised and expanded edition, covers life after 1998, which we will get to, and obviously expands on some of the earlier work that you did there. But why don't we go back and begin at the beginning, as it were? Tell our listeners how you first met Sherlock Holmes.
Well, I was young, and it was around 1960. I can't be sure now if it was the late 50s or the early 60s, and I can't remember now which came first, if it was the books or the BBC radio dramas starring Carlton Hobbs and Norman Shelley. I have a suspicion that they came kind of together. But if I see now the edition of the books, which I had then, which I borrowed from the local library, which were the John Murray editions, I don't know if you know them in America.
Oh, yes. The red-bound books.
No, the ones I'm thinking of were predominantly white on their covers with oil paintings.
Oh, right.
I have them. I'm looking at them right now on my bookshelf.
Well, there you go. I remember them so vividly. I remember the one, I suppose it must have been for Wisteria Lodge, which had Holmes on the cover holding a severed chicken's head, which is a curious thing to put on the cover of a book, but so arresting. But and equally now, if I hear the Carlton Hobbs programs, it takes me right back to those days. I'm 10 again. I'm in my parents' living room. I'm sitting by the big old polished radiogram, listening to those amazingly atmospheric programs.
And as we mentioned, radio being the theater of the mind, when you pictured Sherlock Holmes back in those days when you were listening to Hobbs and Shelley, who was your Sherlock Holmes of your mind?
Well, at that time, when I was growing up, we didn't have television. And so I think the Holmes I pictured was the one from the cover of those books. I don't know who did those drawings. I want to find out. But a wonderful, the lovely, very classic profile, the hair slightly receding, the eyes really gleaming. And I think that was Holmes for me, which makes me wonder how I pictured Watson, because Watson was never illustrated on the covers as far as I remember. I honestly don't remember. I think I pictured them both as younger than Carlton Hobbs and Norman Shelley were, and certainly younger than Norman Shelley played Watson, because he played him old. But I don't know. Perhaps I didn't even have a really definite image at that age. It's an interesting question. I don't know.
And is that your earliest memory of radio, qua radio, or do you have earlier radio memories?
I have other radio memories of around the same time. Radio dramas, certainly. I remember a version of Lost Horizon by James Hilton, which was wonderfully atmospheric. I remember a version of a marvellous book called The Box of Delights by John Masefield. Do you know it?
Oh, sure. Yeah, Patrick Troughton did a televised version of that.
He certainly did,
Yeah.
and I have to tell you that as good as that was, the radio version was infinitely better, because it's the kind of book that works so wonderfully well in your mind. And it was beautifully produced. I remember parts of that so vividly. And I remember light entertainment comedy programs from that era as well.
So the Goons? Were the Goons?
The Goons were slightly before then. They were still going, but I think I was too young to appreciate the Goons. I found the Goons later. I remember a show called Razor Laugh, which starred an English comic very popular then called Ted Ray. And other sort of that kind of sketch show come variety show. They were always on Sunday lunchtime. And if I hear them now, I'm back there and I can smell the cooking coming from the kitchen and my mother doing the roast Sunday lunch.
And what about Archie Andrews? Did you remember Archie?
I had Archie Andrews, yeah. In fact, when I was even younger, I had a toy Archie Andrews doll, that my parents got me one Christmas, which was a prized possession.
Yeah, Archie Andrews, for our listeners who are not in the UK, was UK Charlie McCarthy, basically, and had a great run. He did. And was it Peter Brook? Who was his?
Peter Brough.
Peter Brough, right.
Peter Brough, of whom it was said, another fellow ventriloquist was asked for his opinion of Peter Brough's technical prowess as a vent, and his reply was, Peter's mouth moves more than Archie's does. Which is a little unfair. I mean,
it is. It's radio.
If you work for that long on radio, you do tend to get a little slack, I imagine.
Well, that's what happened to Bergen. You know, Bergen lost his mouth control
I didn't know that.
Yeah. Fascinating.
Well, as long as we're talking about your early influences, Bert, I think we have a clip available from the Carlton Hobbs and Norman Shelley era, just to give our listeners a sense as to what it is that your delicate young ears heard at that age.
Yes, a little taste of Carlton Hobbs.
Here we are, Watson. This is the window.
Yes.
Look at these discolorations. Blood, without a doubt.
This is where they rested the body.
Quickly, a train's coming. Now for a demonstration. Up to the window. Now, see what happens. Look, Watson. The carriage roofs are not 4 feet below us. I see. What do you think of it?
It's a masterpiece. You've never risen to greater height, Holmes.
Oh, I cannot agree.
The wonderful thing about that, is that you have that sense of movement. You have the sense of space. You have the sense of the sound changing as he goes to the window. And
you do. That was around the first time that radio drama was exploring that kind of thing. If you listen to most earlier radio plays, there's very much a sense of actors acting to the microphone. I don't know for a fact, but I can visualize them standing there, with a mic in front of them, and just playing straight to it. With Hobbs and Shelley, you do get a feeling of a setting and of movement. I'd like to think that at the age of 10, I wasn't as bothered as I am now by some of the writing in that clip. Up with the window. It's a little bit on the nose. We hear a wooden sliding sound and the outside noises get louder. What else could he have done? Particularly given that 30 seconds before he'd given us the wonderful line, well, Watson, this is the window.
Right.
I mean...
It's not as if he was, well, let me take my jacket off.
Well, yeah.
The whooshing of outside,
I know. But I don't want to be rude about those scripts. They were very good scripts. They were almost all written by the same man, by Michael Hardwick. And they served the two leads very, very well. And the lovely thing about the two leads is how beautifully they were cast. They're wonderfully contrasted voices. You've got Shelley, who's all sort of port and cigars and dark brown, and you've got Hobbs, who's wonderfully laid back and relaxed and restrained. Possibly, for today's taste, he's a bit too wonderfully laid back and relaxed and restrained to be Sherlock Holmes. But every Holmes reflects the era that he appears in. And I suppose the late 90s, I suppose the late 50s, the early 60s were still in England an age of restraint and control and modesty. I mean, I can't really imagine Holmes saying to Watson, "Oh, I can't agree with you that I've just done something wonderful." I mean, I can imagine him saying, "Well, you're quite right, Watson. That was a brilliant piece of deduction." But they are of their time, and they are still much loved. When we started doing the complete canon, I knew perfectly well that we were up against Hobbes and Shelley. And even though
in England, those are really the series that set the bar for Sherlock Holmes radio serials.
Absolutely,
yeah.
I think they worked together for something like 16 or 17 years.
Wow.
And even then, they didn't do all of the stories. Interestingly, they did, I think, all but 4. They missed out 4 of the weaker ones. They didn't do, I think, the Veiled Lodger, and I think the Red Circle, maybe the Yellow Face they didn't do, and one other.
Interesting. Now, as long as we're focusing on the late 50s, early 60s, because I know we're going to jump backward in time at some point, but why don't we focus on the other 2 dramatizations that were going on around the time? The first being in the square in the mid-50s, we had Sir John Gielgud and Sir Ralph Richardson appearing together. How many episodes were they in together?
That is a very good question, and I don't have the faintest idea.
Okay.
I can look it up if you want to do a retake of me appearing to be wonderfully knowledgeable, but I don't know. It was something like 13 or 14, I think.
It was 15,
I thought
15 or 16, but I think that's about
right. And that was not a BBC production.
No, that's very interesting. It was the BBC, even back then, had several different radio networks. And Hobbes and Shelley, when they first appeared, were on what was then called the Home Service. And it was called the Home Service to distinguish it from the Empire Service, which was a wartime thing, went out all over the world. So Hobbes and Shelley on the Home Service, and over on the Light programme, which was kind of a friendly rival to the Home Service, they bought in these new productions, independent productions, made by a man called Harry Alan Towers, who was active for a long time afterwards, even with Sherlock Holmes stuff. And it was very starry casting. I mean, even then, Sir John and Sir Ralph were very big names indeed. And as people probably know, they brought in, for Moriarty, they brought in Orson Welles, which is fantastic casting. But it's interesting to listen to them now. You can still pick them up on CD, I think, now. If you compare them to the BBC product, they are, in many ways, they're quite different. The whole ethos of them, the approach is different. The BBC's approach was what you might call literary, founded very heavily on the stories. A lot of the dialogue in Michael Hardwick's scripts for Hobbes and Shelley was lifted straight off the page and given to the actors, and there were quite long stretches of Watson narrating, also taken from the stories. If you listen to Gielgud and Richardson, a lot of their dialogue is new. It's the situations are the same, but they're given new and slightly more relaxed, slightly more realistic, perhaps, dialogue.
Well, why don't we go to an example of that? This one is taken from The Blackmailer, which was the dramatization of Charles Augustus Milverton.
Look out of the window, Watson. What a splendid night.
Well, you were only complaining about it a moment ago.
As an honest citizen, as a burglar, I approve of it.
As a burglar?
Yes, I propose to burgle Milverton's house before the night is over, Watson. It's the only way. I just want a few minutes to change my clothes and get rid of this ticklish beard, and then I shall be leaving you for the evening to your peaceful solitude.
No, Holmes, I'm coming with you.
My dear Watson.
You said that we were partners, and that I should do something to shake off my indolence.
Well, we've been sharing these same rooms for some months now. It'd be amusing if we should finish up sharing the same cell. Do you really mean it, Watson?
To the death.
Well, you're a most delightful fellow.
Sherlock Holmes, my cellmate.
Yeah, I mean, you could see what I mean, though. I think it's the right situation, but I don't think any of those lines come from the story, and I think it's possibly the better for it.
Yeah, well, they were great friends, and you can.
Oh, yes, you can tell that. That's
you can hear some of that, but also, my memory. It's been years since I listened to the Gielgud Richardson shows, but my memory of them is that they're quite devoid of
sound effects.
Yeah, I was thinking of the general terms. They're quite settings surround. You can imagine them sort of standing with the scripts in front of the microphone.
Yeah. There's a famous picture of them doing exactly that. And a third one of them, a second, and another one of them with Mr. Wells in the middle. It looks terribly staged, terribly posed, but it's very effective. Yeah, they lack what has come now, particularly in the cinema, to be known as sound design.
Right.
They're just. I mean, mind you, if you're paying for two of the most famous voices in the dramatic world, then perhaps you do just want them to speak the lines to you. And I mean, to be fair, they perform them, they act them. They come over very jolly, don't they? They're very jolly, Holmes and Watson, I think.
Yes,
you can imagine they're sort of smiling to themselves at how silly it all is. Oh boy, we're going to put on these silly masks and go and burgle someone.
Yeah. But it would have been more. Was it the standard? No, it wasn't the standard by the mid-50s. I mean, sound design was bubbling along in radio.
Yeah, it was, certainly, yes.
It calls to mind was it the Hound? The 39 Hound, or was it the Advent? No, it was probably the 39 Hound, where they didn't have time or money for some reason to do a musical score. So there's no music in the 39 Hound, and every time I watch it, I realize how much more effective these dramatic scenes would be if they were punctuated by atmospheric music to give the audience some feeling.
It's very strange that, because they screened The Hound at Indiana last week, and there is music, but only in about the first third of the movie. And then it stops. It just stops. Because I hadn't watched it for years, and I was thinking to myself, I was wrong, there is music in it. And then, just as it starts to get really dramatic and atmospheric, the music goes away.
Yeah. I don't remember the reason. My old friend Chris Steinbrenner, I remember, told us once why that was, but I don't remember the details.
They probably just ran out of budget.
That was something.
But does it work that way? Do you commission a composer and he says, "Well, I've done a third of the score. Now I want some more money."
No, of course not.
They say, "No, we don't have any more money." He said, "Okay, you're not getting any more music." I mean, at the very least, they could have reused the music they already had.
Oh yeah, that is why it's unusual. And 20th Century Fox was not shy of money in 1939.
No, I know. But they're at the climax. When it really would have made the most difference. That's when you think they would have put the most music in. But so, well, why don't we move to? We have another clip here, and I have to say I'm not familiar with this duo. It's Richard Hurndall and Brian Coleman. Can you tell us about that collaboration, Bert?
I can't tell you much about the actors, I'm afraid. I can tell you that it was a 5-part version of The Sign of 4, and it was in 1959, so it was around the time that Hobbs and Shelley were working, and it was around the time that the Gielgud ones were still being broadcast and repeated, and I don't quite know why it was made. It's interesting. Hobbs and Shelley started off, another curious thing about their shows, the first series, which was a very dark and atmospheric series. They did some of the grimmest of the stories in their first series, and they put them out at tea time in a slot called Children's Hour, which was aimed very firmly at kids who were about the age I was when I was listening, so I can't really complain about it. And then later, for their second series and onwards, they were moved to an adult time slot in the evening. Possibly because if they were still in Children's Hour at this time, then this was an experiment with a different Holmes and Watson. Maybe the BBC were thinking, well, we need a Holmes and Watson to do more. Are we going to go with Hobbs and Shelley? Shall we try out? Perhaps it was a tryout. I don't know. But it's quite an effective show, I think. It holds up well, apart from a couple of minor points which we can talk about after you've played the clip.
That's him, all right. Look at the wooden stump. Watch that bundle.
It's a man. A miniature man. The smallest and most savage I have ever seen.
And armed with a blowpipe. We must take no chances. Fire if he raises his head. It was well that we had so clear a view. Even as we looked, the pygmy plucked out from under the dark blanket in which he was wrapped a short, round piece of wood, like a school ruler, and clapped it to his lips. Our pistols rang out together.
Mr. Holmes, the Aurora. The wooden-legged man's got the rudder. He's steering into the bank.
Let him.
It's good stuff, isn't it? It's nice and pacey and good performances, nicely contrasted voices. But again, we've got the same problem. In their anxiety to get the visuals across, we've got rather on-the-nose dialogue. It's a small man, a miniature man. He's the ugliest I've ever seen. Now, that is not the natural thing for a character to say under those circumstances. And then we cut immediately to Watson narrating, and he tells us what we've just been told in the dialogue. We've just been told, if he comes out from under the blanket, shoot. And Watson says, well, he came out from under the blanket and we shot. And we go back against the scene and bang, bang, they shoot. It seems to me you could take that bit of narration out completely and the scene would be exactly the same. In fact, the scene would be better.
Yeah.
But, again, I don't want to be rude. It's the fashion of the times. It's the way it was done. They were very, very concerned about the fact that the audience couldn't see. And I think one of the biggest changes that has happened to radio drama is that writers and directors have become less concerned about the fact that the audience cannot see. And there's a growing movement, I think, that holds that the audience are the better for not being able to see. As long as things are suggested, then the beauty of radio is that the audience can have their own visuals in the privacy of their own minds, and everyone can have a different image. Everyone can have a different Tonga, everyone can have a different Jonathan Small, everyone can have a different Holmes and Watson. And to have to take that away by pinning it down, I know you've got another clip that...
I know exactly which one you're talking about.
that goes to extremes with this, and we'll talk about that when you play it. But it's true with visual, with descriptions of how people look. You get an awful lot in the 50s of radio characters telling each other things that they can see perfectly well for themselves.
Yeah. So why don't we head to that one right now?
Oh, okay.
I think that is the second clip from The Speckled Band from 1945, starring Cedric Hardwicke as Sherlock Holmes.
Can I prove to you, Mr. Holmes, that I am the wrong man to meddle with? Yes, I think I can. Let me demonstrate with the poker from your heart. I pick it up like this. I grasp it at each end. I bend and bend and bend until it twists into a curve. There's your poker back again.
Now,
wow.
You have to admit that it was very kind of Dr. Voylot to describe in such detail to Holmes exactly what was going on just in front of his face. But again, it's the fashion, and that's how they did it. But it comes over awkward today, doesn't it? And that script, we should say that that's the earliest surviving BBC Sherlock Holmes production from 1945. The script was by John Dixon Carr.
Oh, wow.
A very well-known writer indeed, of course, and a very good writer. And it just goes to show that even a very good writer can come something of a cropper when he's trying to get to grips with a difficult medium. And radio is a very difficult medium to write for.
And while we're on the subject of this portrayal of the Speckled Band, let's hear the first clip and talk a bit about Cedric Hardwicke's impersonation of Sherlock Holmes.
When you combine the idea of the whistle, the band of gypsies, the doctor's financial interest in preventing this girl's marriage... Oh, now, come, Watson. Surely you noticed that. And finally, metallic clang that might have been caused by a folding window bar.
You think that's the line of solution?
May well be, Watson, and yet... What in the devil's name is that?
I think that's a very fine performance. For one thing, he's got the most marvellous voice. But also, that just within that very short clip, it's a very varied performance. He goes from quiet and introspective to big and outgoing, and he does it by actually working the microphone. We were talking earlier about how you sometimes get the feel they're just standing there acting at a microphone. Hardwick uses the microphone. He comes in close for his quiet, introspective moments. He turns away for the big moments. It all helps to give, again, a sense of the setting, which actually isn't really there in the production. It's all down to him. He was a very, very famous actor indeed. Mm-hmm. As famous in his day as Gielgud and Richardson were a decade later. And that was very starry casting.
Mm. And he was mostly famous in those days for his stage work, wasn't he?
He was indeed, yes. Yeah.
Because in the States, you know, I remember him in Universal horror movies. But I don't know that he was ever in a Holmes picture. I don't think so.
But his son, of course.
I was going to say, yes, his son Edward Hardwick made, I believe, a small name for himself in the Sherlock Holmes world. Hardwick doesn't look like a Holmes. Perhaps that's why. He was a rather fleshy, big-built guy. But nonetheless, I mean, other fleshy, big-built guys have played Holmes in visual media, so he could have done. It would have been a delight to see him play the part.
Mm. Absolutely.
Now, what happens after that crash, at the end of that clip, goes straight back to what we were saying earlier about tortuous dialogue to put over the appearance of somebody. Because what happens immediately following that is that Mrs. Hudson rushes in. And Mrs. Hudson, in contrast to the wonderful sort of refined tones of Holmes, Mrs. Hudson is a real sort of core blimey Cockney lady in this production. And she comes in, and I can't give you the exact lines, but it's something like, oh, Mr. Holmes, it's so terrible. There's a man outside, he's so tall, I swear, the top of his head is brushing the top of the doorway, and he's so big he knocked over my coffee table as he came by. Oh, Mr. Holmes. And then, of course, Dr. Grimesby Roylott comes in, and we all know exactly what he's like. And you heard the performance in the other clip. Richard George is the name of the actor. Wonderful performance. I mean, divorce it from what he was saying, and it's a wonderful performance. And his attitude and his voice and his words should have been enough to give the audience the picture of what he's like. Nowadays, we wouldn't want, I think, to be told that he's very tall and very big. We can tell that. And if you want to imagine him as a slight dwarf, capable of bending pokers, I'm not sure that's not even more effective. Why not? But the whole show, it does stand up well. Its use of narration and of the on-the-nose dialogue is a shame now, but then it was perfectly acceptable. It was the way it was done.
Sure. Now, not that this is any kind of lesson in either production, sound quality, or anything, but I think just because we have access to it, it's I think, exciting to share this. This is a clip from the very first Holmes appearance on radio.
If I may interrupt you.
Go ahead.
No, it's not.
Yeah. It's not.
No, it's not. The very first Holmes appearance on radio is lost.
Oh, no.
This is a recording of the same actor who played Holmes in that production, but it was a private recording made in someone's home 3 or 4 years after the broadcast.
Yes.
And so it gives you the flavour of what that first broadcast must have been like. But sadly, the whole of that broadcast is now lost.
Well, I like that. How did I know? How do I know anything? How do I know that you opened an office and resumed the practice of medicine without telling me a word about it? How do I know you've been getting yourself very wet lately, that you have an extremely careless servant girl, and that you've moved your dressing table to the other side of your room?
And there, ladies and gentlemen, you have just heard the voice of none other than William Gillette.
It's so sad and odd in a way. A couple of things about Gillette. One is also his film, Sherlock Holmes. I mean, he played the character so many times on stage all around the world and made a film. So in addition to the radio broadcast being lost, the film is also lost. But here's the other curious thing. Recording technology had been around since the late 19th century. And among the many people whom you would have thought would have had their voice recorded was Mark Twain. And there is no extant, and I don't believe there ever was, a recording made of Mark Twain's voice. When Hal Holbrook recreated Mark Twain for his Mark Twain Tonight shows over the years, he relied on research and descriptions of what Twain sounded like. But the reason why I bring this up is that, of course, Gillette was from Connecticut, and in his early days, he borrowed money from Twain to get himself started as an actor, which he eventually repaid, one of the few loans Twain ever made that anybody ever repaid. But Gillette would do an impersonation of Mark Twain. And this is available on the Internet somewhere. I don't quite remember where, but I've heard it within recent memory. So the only way we have of really hearing what Mark Twain's voice sounded like happens to be William Gillette's impersonation of him.
That's fascinating.
Well, I know when I think of Mark Twain, I always prefer to do the William Gillette Mark Twain.
These things can be disappointing. We have, in this country, a very early recording which purports to be a recording of Oscar Wilde, who was around just about at the time when he could have been recorded. And it's immensely disappointing. It's a very strange, if it's really him. It just doesn't sound like Oscar Wilde ought to sound. I mean, in a way, that it's a radio drama thing, isn't it? You know, we want these people to sound the way they sound in our heads. And this Oscar Wilde just doesn't sound right at all.
Well, you know, so we've lost so much of how sounds and performances, the context of them in their time. I mean, as an example, there are, I think, 2 recordings of Edwin Booth. You know, Booth died in 1893, but there are, and he was sort of the American Henry Irving, and was a great Shakespearean actor. And there are a couple of extant wax cylinder recordings of Booth. But when you hear him, what you hear is the odd difference in how Shakespearean text was declaimed on the stage in the 19th century versus the more realistic presentations we're familiar with today. So it sounds like sort of an extended rumble, you know, and it's sad in a way.
Well, why don't we get more toward the core of what I know everyone is on the edge of their collective seats to listen to here, and that is the BBC series. So Bert, as you grew, and obviously your association with Holmes and Watson continued to grow, at what point did you say to yourself, I think the world is ready for a new dramatization of some Holmes stories, and what led you to the point of being a radio writer?
Well, I worked for the BBC as a librarian. I was by professional training a librarian, and I worked in the music library of the BBC. And I listened, obviously, to a lot of things on the radio. And one day I heard a play, and it was so bad. I couldn't believe it. And I found myself thinking, oh, my God, that's so bad. Even I could write a better play than that. And from there, the train of logic went, well, okay, if you can write a better play than that, write a better play than that and see what happens. So I wrote, it was a kind of dramatized feature. It was called Wagner in Hell. And it was about Richard Wagner, the composer, and his visit to England in the 1850s, I think it was. And I wrote it, and I sent it in purely to see what would happen. And to my absolute amazement, they bought the thing. No, I was utterly thunderstruck. And I was invited to go along and meet the producer and chat about who we should cast in it. And then I was invited to the studio to be there when it was recorded. And I saw the whole process. And I just sort of fell in love with the whole process. It was just amazing. You know that feeling that sometimes happens when you find yourself in a place or a situation and you think, this is right, this is good, this is what I should be doing. And that's what happened to me. And so I wrote a couple of other short plays. And then I thought, well, it would be nice to try something a bit longer. What can I look at? And it was pure cheek, it really was, because I pitched The Hound of the Baskervilles, never for a moment, and this is not false modesty, never for a moment thinking that I would get it. I mean, I'd sold 2 plays and a feature, and this was Sherlock Holmes, for God's sake, you know. I mean, they would never in a million years give it to me. And,
sacred territory.
Well, exactly so, yeah. I mean, the BBC then, and now to a certain extent, is still very literary based. It's a very literary learned organisation, and these things are treated with great, not reverence, but great care. And I didn't think I could possibly get it, which meant when I did get it, I was again absolutely amazed. But I got the commission, The Hound of the Baskervilles, 2 one-hour episodes in a very prestigious slot. The BBC radio drama has different slots, different times of day, different days of the week. And this was for the classic serial slot, which is where they did Ibsen and Jane Austen and Dickens and stuff like that. Oh. So, you know, that was pleasing. So then the whole process began exactly as before. I was invited in to meet the producer, a wonderful man called David Johnson. And we talked about the show and how it should come together and who we should cast. I should say that one of the great things about the BBC radio drama department is that the writer is treated with amazing amounts of respect, far more so in my experience than in any other medium. I'm always consulted right from the beginning. I'm consulted about casting. I'm always consulted about any script changes that the producer wants. I'm always at the recordings. Nothing happens without it being passed through me on the whole, which is a wonderful thing for a writer and very, very rare. So I chatted to David. He said something to me that I've never forgotten. He said, we have 4 stars in this show. We have Sherlock Holmes, we have Dr. Watson, we have the Hound, and we have the Moor. And we must give each of them their due time and their due emphasis.
That's very astute.
Isn't that good? He was a great director, David Johnson. He really was. And I said, well, you know, the Hound, I can see how to do the Hound. The Moor, he said, we use music. We use music and we use minimal sound painting to give people the bleakness and the expanse and the quiet wind in the trees and the owls at night and all the rest of it.
And what sort of music would one commission or use for bringing the Moor to life? He used an existing piece of music which I'd never heard of, called Egdon Heath by Gustav Holst.
Gustav Holst, yes, indeed. The man who wrote The Planets, for which he's much better known. But Egdon Heath is wonderful. I recommend your listeners to go and find a copy and listen to it. It's exactly what David described the Moor as being. It's open and bleak and mysterious. It fitted so well. I can't tell you. I was so delighted with that. That was the beginning of my determination to make music a very, very integral part of the shows. But I'm getting ahead of myself. It was a very integral part of The Hound of the Baskervilles.
Well, and let's take a listen to a little clip from this 1988 production of The Hound with Roger Rees.
Here he comes. Watson?
Something's happening at the house.
Damn this fog. Down, Watson.
He's a brave man, Holmes. Holmes, don't move a muscle. It's coming. Now, Watson! You hit it, Watson! Its eyes are on fire. What manner of creature? Watson, if we can wound it, we can kill it. Sir Henry, come on! Where is it? This way! Sir Henry. He's still alive, Holmes. Watson, are you all right?
Yes. My God. Look at that brute. What in heaven's name is it?
It's dead. Whatever it is. We've laid the family ghost once and forever.
Wow.
I like to think that still holds up pretty well, that little sequence.
It does. It does.
You can hear from that, I think, that what we were talking about, the sound design has moved on another step, and that there's a willingness in that to let pauses, to let effects, to let non-verbal vocalization carry quite a lot of the dramatic weight.
Well, and because of the power of radio, that scene becomes more real and terrifying to the listener than in certainly some of the film portrayals of the Hound.
I can say this because I wasn't responsible for the production. I think the Hound, in that one moment where we first hear it growl, I think that's more frightening than any visual hound I've ever seen.
Right.
I mean, we were talking about the Rathbone movie, and the lack of music doesn't help it, but the Hound in it doesn't register. I've never seen a hound that lived up to the description in the book.
That's true.
That generated the terror of the description in the book. And on radio, you can do it. You can do it. And David Johnston and the sound effects guys, I mean, huge praise to them. And the actors made that moment really, really live, I think.
Now, this stuck out at me when I was reading the book. The lead, Roger Rees, who actually turned out to be very good in the role, was not the original actor that was selected for the role. The original actor you refer to in the book, you refer to as our Sherlock, without actually naming him. Someone who had to excuse himself from his contract.
Yeah, yes.
Can you offer us any clues?
No. I don't think that would be fair, but I can tell you the story. What happened was, the day before we were due in the studio to record the show, we were in the same studio recording a violinist, because in between the scenes of that Hound, we used little violin flourishes, and of course we had a scene where Holmes actually plays the violin, so we had our violinist in to record those. And we were deep in recording this, and we were having quite a job to persuade her. She kept wanting to retake bits because she hadn't got them exactly right. Some of the music was really fiendish, and I can remember David saying to her, "This is not a concert. You're being a very good amateur. You're playing a part." And she, like a lot of musicians, she found that difficult to kind of grasp. But right in the middle of all this, the phone rang, and the production assistant answered the phone, and I was in there, the cubicle with her, and I said, yes. Oh, I see. Yes, right, thank you. And she put the phone down. And I remember her exact words. She said, "Guess what? We've just lost our Holmes."
Oh.
And what had happened was, actually, to be strictly truthful, we hadn't, strictly speaking, lost him at that stage. What had happened was that the actor had been offered, I think it was a movie. That day, his agent had phoned him up and said, "You've just been offered this incredibly great part in this movie that's going to be shot in the Bahamas or somewhere."
Wow.
And he'd phoned up the director, who he knew personally. To his credit, he didn't do it through his agent. He phoned up and he said, "Would you mind excusing me from the contract so I can do the movie?" And David, I mean, it was a dilemma, but it wasn't really, because David could have said, no, you signed the contract, you're going to come in and do Sherlock Holmes.
Right.
But the guy was a professional, he would have done a very good job, but we still would have had 5 days in the studio with a rather disgruntled leading man. And it simply wasn't worth it. So David released him. And then we just sat round and we let the violinist go away and practice a bit. And we just drew up these lists. Everybody, there was me, the director, the production assistant, and the 2 technicians who were all there to record the music. And we all drew up lists of who can play Sherlock Holmes, And when we compared them, Roger Rees turned up on almost everybody's list. And we said, right, well, Roger Rees, he's a very famous actor, he's going to be busy, he's never going to be available. And besides, someone said, he doesn't do radio. Now, some actors don't do radio, they don't care for it. And David said, oh, what the hell, phone his agent and see. So, good old production assistant phoned Roger Rees' agent, and she was told, A, he's free, B, he's always wanted to play Sherlock Holmes, and C, the reason he doesn't do radio is that no one's ever asked him to do radio. so we were in, and it worked out brilliantly. He was a wonderful Sherlock Holmes, I think. And he played wonderfully opposite his Watson, who was a man called Crawford Logan, enormously experienced radio actor. And, I mean, that wasn't the best of clips to hear the relationship, but they bounced off beautifully off each other. And it worked really well.
And that was 5 days in the studio?
5 days, including the music. The rule of thumb the BBC worked to is that you can record half an hour's worth of finished programme in a day in the studio. You come out at the end of the day with 30 minutes worth of material. So an hour-long episode gets 2 days, and obviously a 2-part serial, 2 hours gets 4 days. That worked to our advantage when we came to do the later shows, because the short stories were 45 minutes. Now, normally we would have been given a day and a half in the studio, but we were always given 2 days, and that was a marvellous luxury, because it gave us a bit of breathing space and a bit of time to redo things if we weren't entirely happy with them. It's a very concentrated procedure, making radio drama. I mean, I've spoken to people who tend to think that, you just go in and the actors sit down and they open their scripts and they read the lines and then they'll go home again. It doesn't work that way. It's a very physical process. That's
the way it works here on I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere.
And you still give these magnificent performances.
It's all because of the rehearsal.
Of course.
It sounds so natural.
Yeah, but people who come in and visit the studios are often very surprised, because we build sets. I mean, they're not sets that would stand up to a visual medium, but that we build sets with practical doors and windows and furniture, and the actors play in the set and they move about and they come and they go and they use props. And in all other respects, it's acted exactly the way it would be if it were a visual show. And that, I think, is what gives certainly modern radio dramas a lot of their power. You can tell your voice sounds differently if you're moving when you're speaking. Your voice sounds differently if you're looking up or if you're looking down. You speak differently if you're close to someone than the way you do if you're far away. And it all adds. We were talking earlier about the sense of scene and setting. It all adds to that. But because of that, each scene is rehearsed a couple of times and then run through on mic and then taken once, maybe twice, and maybe retakes are made. So to get through half an hour's worth of material is really pretty intensive. I know Clive Merrison described it once as requiring more concentration and making more decisions about your acting than in any other medium. In that sense, it throws an awful lot of weight onto the actors. The actors have to be really on top of it, and on top of the medium as well.
Well, we hate to leave you hanging, folks, but we're running out of time, and Bert has so much more to say. Don't you, Bert?
Why, yes, I do. It's
the other Bert.
Oh,
The
right.
other Bert.
Oh, yes, he does too.
Yes, and we were having just such a fine time in that interview. We did not want to cut it short. So this is, as the title of this episode hinted at, a two-parter, folks.
Yeah.
So we're going to get to some other business here, and we'll get back to Mr. Coules in the next episode.
Yes, you can see how it ends. I have to say that talking to Bert is the fulfillment of a very long-standing wish. I was fortunate enough when I was in London to, I'm still a member, but actually to attend meetings of the Sherlock Holmes Society of London. And Bert gave a magnificent talk, now it must be about 15 years ago, about the entire range of Holmes on radio, punctuated with clips. And so the opportunity to revisit this subject with him and to preserve and immortalize it and share it all with you is really something that Scott and I have been talking about doing for a long while, and I'm just thrilled we could spend the time with him.
And I do still have the CD that Bert gave me because he gave, it must have been a very similar talk at the BSI Distinguished Speaker Lecture in New York for the BSI weekend from January 2002. He put all of his audio clips on one track there, and I asked him if I might get a copy of it, and he handed me the very copy that he used during that talk, and he signed it to me.
That's wonderful.
He signed it to Scott, who has no idea of the value of things.
Well, I wonder where that came from.
So it was great to fulfill that.
And why were you deficient on the value side when he wrote that? What's that connected to?
Oh, he didn't think it was worth anything.
He was being self-deprecating.
He's very, very self-effacing. That's
yes.
That's British to a T, but that's Bert because he's even more so.
Yes.
And he was glad to sign it over to me, which I was thrilled. So I have that sitting next to my original copy of 221 BBC.
Yeah, excellent.
So we have to pay some bills, don't we?
We do. And speaking of 221 BBC, you can is that now available for purchase at the wessexpress.com? It
is indeed. If you go right up to wessexpress.com, you can find it there on their site.
Yeah, you can. I do not own a copy, but I will order one toot sweet. But it's the complete story of Holmes and the BBC, and as you can tell by this conversation, it's something you're probably going to want to add to your library.
Indeed, as well as obviously lots of other fine stuff there at wessexpress.com.
Yes, and once you've exhausted yourself at wessexpress.com, you can exhaust yourself further at bakerstreetjournal.com.
Very exhausting.
Where if you do not have a subscription, please stop right this moment and subscribe to the Baker Street Journal to get 4 wonderful quarterly issues as well as a Christmas annual, and continue a fine tradition that began in 1946 of Sherlockian scholarship that will thrill and delight you.
And I think we have one other sponsor standing by.
Friends, with today's global crises, there's little room for humor. That's why you need the Sherlock Holmes brand Jeffro Rucastle Joke Book. It's the only joke book with guaranteed knee slappers such as a bishop, an actress, and an Andaman Islander walk into a pub. And it's the only joke book that delivers the 3 C's: cheerful, chuckles, and chortles. Be ready the next time your governess cuts her hair. Ask for the Jeffro Rucastle Joke Book at your dealers today.
Oh, always fun. Always fun. Cool. Well, just as we wrap up here, a couple of other business items to note. The first is that we did promise you folks back in episode 65 that we would be doing a giveaway. And it would be for folks who participated, who used the hashtag IHose65 and told us who their favorite Sherlock Holmes was and why. And we have a winner and we have a runner-up. Just as a reminder, the grand prize winner will receive a signed print of Tom Richmond's 8 Sherlocks. And the runner-up will receive a Sherlock Holmes pen that was 3D modeled after Tom's artwork. So the winner is none other than John Geehan. John Geehan, who commented on our Facebook page saying, "Loved your latest audio episode with Tom Raymond." Tom Raymond? I think he means Tom Richmond. No, we won't deduct points for that. Don't worry, John. Since he's
he
a
may
fan,
mean Alex Raymond. Yeah.
That could be. Could mean Raymond Burr, who for all that, I don't know.
Isn't it true?
Since he's a fan of the Adam West Batman TV show, he might find this interesting. In 1949, a show called Your Show Time did the adventure of the Speckled Man. Playing Holmes was none other than Alan Napier.
Oh, right.
Of course, he played Alfred the Butler on Adam West's Batman. Just in case this qualifies me for the contest, hashtag IHose65. Well
done.
That's a great comment.
That is a great comment.
A great observation. I don't know that a lot of people knew that Alan Napier was Sherlock Holmes.
That Alan Napier Holmes is available online, maybe through the Internet Archive, but I've seen it. It may be on YouTube, but I've seen it within the last year, so it's out there.
Fantastic. And let's see who our runner-up is. Our runner-up, just because, is Michael Quigley. Yay, Michael Quigley. And this actually, and gentlemen, if you could both get in touch with us, we'll, of course, get in touch with you, too, making sure that we have your mailing address, but we will straighten that all out. But just last weekend, I saw that his new Scion Society, and it is a Scion, the Diogenes Club of Washington, had its inaugural meeting.
Now is that the state of or the District of Columbia?
It is D.C.
So in Red Circle territory.
Yes, and Peter Blau was there to present the official Scion certificate.
Oh, how great.
So they're official. Dan Andriaco received an honorary investiture, and looked like it was well done and well attended. Well, the other event, too, that has been getting a lot of press lately, certainly on our site, but from folks all around, is the lovely From Gillette to Brett 4.
Yes.
We are so sorry we couldn't be there.
But we're going to be there for Gillette to Brett 5.
We're planning already.
I've already got my ticket.
But yeah, Gillette to Brett 4. Wow, what a time it looked like. And I know Bert Coules was there, as we mentioned in the interview. We have, I think, 5 or 6 different recaps on IHearOfSherlockEverywhere.com. And I want to take a moment to thank our contributors, not only of those entries, but of others along the way. We've had contributions from Tim Greer, Jacqueline Morris, Ann Margaret Lewis, Ray Betzner, Gordon Dimowski, Jesse Levine, and J.D. Sutter, who actually helped us with the overall architecture and design of our site. So it's great to see our contributors actually adding to the annals and the archives at I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere. So thank you all very much. And if you are interested in becoming a contributor, show up to the site, IHearOfSherlock.com, check it out, and submit your name.
Yeah, the one of our sponsors is the Baker Street Journal, and of course, Sherlockian doings have been connected with publishing since the very earliest days. After all, if you want to go back to
Ronald Knox?
Yes, Ronald Knox. I was trying to remember the name of studies in Sherlock Holmes.
Oh, yeah. H.W. Bell.
Yeah, and there are plenty of other science societies. All of us who've been involved in science have put out publications. from time to time in various means, and the Watson Society is a great journal. But I hear Sherlock.com is virtually instant. And so if you would like to dip your toe in the water of Sherlockian writing, coverage, news, and scholarship, it's as easy as sending an email and seeing, what we can do to give you a topic and get you get your words to live forever on the internet.
Yes, dip away.
Yeah.
We are non-denominational. We accept all comers.
Yes, we do. And all Cumberbatches.
As long as you know how to write.
Well, writing is really... you have all the words in the dictionary. It's just putting them in the right order.
That's true.
It's a bit time-consuming, but it's not a problem.
It happens.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of time-consuming, I'm feeling like we've consumed an awful lot of time this episode. So why don't we get gassy?
Oh!
Okay. So we'll delve in here. Now, this is interesting because we didn't really have much luck going through the past issues of the Baker Street Journal for this particular topic, at least this time around. And, whenever you do a two-parter, that means you have to have two gas lamps that are both related to the same show. So we struggled. But in this case, we thought we'd go right to the source, and we will read the introduction from Bert Coules' own 221 BBC. Introduction: The Theatre of the Mind's Eye. From the first play ever broadcast over the UK airwaves in May 1923, the public service British Broadcasting Corporation set out to become the national theatre of the air, supplying its steadily growing audience with everything from the classics to daily soap opera serials. Almost from the beginning, versions of books and short stories were transmitted alongside original pieces. The first novel to be dramatized was Westward Ho by Charles Kingsley. And the medium attracted and continues to attract the country's leading writers and actors. One of the first playwrights to appreciate the possibilities was George Bernard Shaw. In a 1925 letter to the BBC's listing magazine Radio Times, he was scathing about some of the corporation's earliest efforts. It is absurd for the BBC to persist in asking handsome actresses and well-known pictorial producers to get up ordinary theatrical performances and allow the public to merely overhear the dialogue. Shaw realized that sound-only drama could offer much more than just straightforward plays with the visual dimension missing. Radio speaks directly to its listeners' imaginations. It can conjure both intense intimacy and huge spectacle with only the subtlest touches of sound. Its low budgets and rapid production time encourage experimentation and audacity, and for the performer, it offers unique and welcome opportunities. On radio, the strapping lantern jaw action hero can be played by a short, fat, balding actor with a broken nose and a squint, as long as it sounds right. The voice is everything. The medium requires acting in its purest and perhaps its most demanding form. The post-war rise of television robbed radio much of its dominance and its audience, but even today, when BBC Radio is a slimmed-down shadow of its great former self, a considerable amount of radio drama is still being produced. A typical week sees the national spoken word station Radio 4 broadcasting upwards of 16 hours worth of plays, serials, and series. Audiences for the more popular slots can be well over 1 million listeners, with commercial audio cassettes and CDs reaching even more. And the BBC remains the largest single employer of writers and actors in the UK, possibly the world.
What a great tradition the BBC radio literature, the spoken word output of the BBC is. I follow several comedy shows from the BBC, and one of my favorites, Just a Minute, which has been chairmaned by Nicholas Parsons, just marked its 900th episode.
Wow. That's great.
Have you ever heard it? Have you ever heard Just a Minute?
I have not. I need to take a look at that.
Oh, I should send you a couple.
Is it a podcast or?
It's 30 minutes. It began. It was invented by a fellow named Ian Messiter, and it's a panel game. But the game is to speak on a topic that's given you by the chairman for 60 seconds without hesitation, repetition, or deviation from the subject. And Gideon Hill and I and Frank Ferry used to talk, because Gideon and Frank are also fans, used to talk about doing a Sherlockian version of Just a Minute, and I would love to do that. Really love to do that. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah. Oh, that would be fun.
Yeah. I'll send you one to listen to. I've been listening to them for years.
Yeah. And of course Bert's piece was written back in 1999. He mentioned audio cassettes. Some of our younger listeners may be scratching their heads saying, "What is that?" But of course the BBC has now moved into the new media era and is using lots of digital means of communications. And I don't know if you've ever had occasion to go to bbc.co.uk and view any of their videos. But when you go to turn the volume up on that, the volume control actually goes to 11, which is a nice kind of in-joke to This Is Spinal Tap. Mine goes to 11.
I love This Is Spinal Tap. Christopher Guest.
Well, let's do the decent here, shall we?
For once?
Please. And tell people that you are Bert Wolder.
Yes, and that just leaves the inescapable conclusion that you are Scott Monty. And together we say, the game's afoot!
I'm afraid that in the pleasure of this conversation, I am neglecting business of importance, which awaits me elsewhere.
Thank you for listening. Please be sure to join us again for the next episode of I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, the first podcast dedicated to Sherlock Holmes.
Goodbye, and good luck, and believe me to be, my dear fellow, very sincerely yours, Sherlock Holmes.